what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and in today's episode, we're going to be interviewing my new friend, Constantin Morun. Constantin has been sharing some incredible wisdom about when he was growing up in the country of Romania during the time of communism. He's a very unique perspective before they turned into a democracy just a few years into his life, and what it was like for his family to move out of that country at such a hectic time, leaving behind all of his friends, family members, and his high school sweetheart. And ever since Constantine moved away from Romania, he's been living in Canada, and his experiences have just been getting stronger and wilder by the minute. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing with him what it was like to live in Romania at the time of communism, as well as why it's important to be holding yourself accountable and what neuroplasticity is inside of self-improvement. So you're not going to want to miss today's episode. Before we jump full force into the episode, though, we have to share the quote of the day. And the quote is this: "Fear is the thief of dreams." And it's by Brian Kronz. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing that a lot on how some of the fear impacts us inside of our daily lives and what kind of fear implemented inside Constantine's family before they left Romania and what their decision to up and leave has caused for his family since. And here's a spoiler alert: they have had a great life since. So guys, thanks so much for listening, and let's jump into today's episode. Perfect. Well, Constantine, thanks for jumping on the show with us today. I'm super excited, and I know there's going to be a lot of wisdom to be shared. But just to go ahead and get started on today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, you grew up in an interesting area, one that I feel like not very many people actually know somebody from. You grew up in Romania, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, your upbringing, and eventually how you ended up moving out of there. But tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. So I was born in Eastern Europe. Romania is part of Eastern Europe, used to be part of the Eastern Bloc at one point or another. And when I was born back in 83, which kind of dates me now, but when I was born in 83, it was still a communist country. And in fact, for the next 7 or so years, the country went through quite a bit of turmoil, lots of scarcity, lots of poverty, lots of fear. And I was fortunate enough to be born in a family that had a tiny bit more access to resources than others. And I'm not saying a rich family by any means, just someone, because of where they worked in factories, they had access to a few more resources. In terms of at least food, I didn't go without. And they were trying to protect me from the outside world. Now, of course, as you and I both know, no matter how much you try to protect someone from what's actually happening around them, the energies of the people doing the protection, so your caretakers, your teachers, those still get fed through. People still get to feel it. They still get to learn it. And it wasn't until I was about 7 years old when there was a big revolution. I remember there were wars in the street, essentially between the population and the military and the government. And the city I was in was the one where it all started. So I have memories from that time, which were pretty scary to say the least. And then, of course, Romania moved into a democracy, but you and I talked about this on my show. Nothing changes overnight. So it still took years and years for things to change, and they weren't necessarily changing for the better. There was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of bribing going on, where if you had to get somewhere, or you wanted to get somewhere, you had to always bring it back to resources, and money was a big resource, of course. And that's actually one of the big reasons why we left Romania as a family, so that my brother, who's younger, 5 years, and myself, so when I was 17 and he was 12, we moved to Canada with my parents, so we have a better chance at a better future. We can go to school, we can get careers, and hopefully not have to deal with as much corruption and as much negativity as we had to deal with back home. And I'm not saying that everyone is like that in Romania. I love the people there. I mean, I'm one of them as well, and I'm Canadian as well. But it's a different environment, right? So you have more opportunities in places like North America, or at least at the time there were. And that's kind of what brought me there, and a bit more about my history. I would say one more thing I'll add, because in the interest of your show, which is about getting over yourself, a big learning step for me in Romania was getting over myself from a limiting mindset to a growth mindset, or like from a mindset that didn't really encourage sharing and looking at failures as lessons, but more as something to hide, something to keep away, because you couldn't be yourself, or you could be punished. You could be removed from communities, and people would look down upon you, right? So that was a huge, big piece that I had to unravel as I moved to Canada and started to see the way it's actually possible to acknowledge that I made a mistake and then learn from it.
And I got to go a little bit more in depth inside your time in Romania. You're 17 years old. Obviously, like you mentioned, you're kind of growing up in a situation where you knew what was going around, but you're also trying to be sheltered from those around you, trying to protect you.
Yes.
What was it like growing up in a communist country like that? And then what was the sentiment of the people? Obviously, there was a war, and so they wanted to kind of free themselves of that regime at the time. But what was the sentiment of the people? What was everyone feeling? What were kind of the stalemates going around? As a young kid your age, what was life like? Were you playing in the streets every day, playing games and stuff with your friends? Or was it very tense? You had to stay inside because there was all the stress going around of the war?
Another question. To me, it all seemed like that's normal. I didn't get to realize how different it could have been until I moved to Canada and I experienced a different type of lifestyle, communities and whatnot. And one of the big things that I remember back from Romania that was very different in North America, beyond the fact that, yes, there was more scarcity, a lot more actually, people were having a hard time, but people were still good people. You were surrounded by family, you're surrounded by friends, people didn't have much, yet they were happy. And we were in a city, but we had relatives in the country. And in the country, they would have a small home, they might have a cow or two, some pigs, and it would be a whole other type of community. And that aspect, when I moved to Canada, that was very, very different because, like you mentioned at the beginning, we did have to leave pretty much everyone behind, right? It was just the four of us moving, and then all my friends, because I was a teenager, right? So I had tons of friends, my back then high school sweetheart, all of that had to be left behind, including other relatives, right? Grandparents and aunts and uncles and all that.
And so growing up, I'm assuming you were very close to these relatives, your friends and whatnot. Was there ever some sort of division amongst, more sentimented towards the current government and the more communist party at the time? Or was everyone in your close relationships like, all right, we're ready for a change?
That's a great question because, I was so young at the time. I was about 6.5 when the revolution started, so I had no idea what was going on. Now, of course, later on, I got to learn that because the town I was in is the one where the revolution started, and then it went to everywhere else, most people were not happy. And they were against the government because you see at the time, again, this is my understanding, and of course, people can do a bit more research if they're interested, but Romania was attempting, and it was successful in becoming debt-free. So what that meant is that they had to export a lot, which meant that if, let's say, you and I are in Romania, we wouldn't get as much because the entire idea behind the plan was to strip as much as possible, sell externally, like everything you produce, most of it. And that meant that people in the country didn't have enough for themselves. Now, Romania became successful, became debt-free, but there was a huge price to pay for that, right? With the dissatisfaction of the population, the hunger, the fear, all of it that came with it. So yes, I will tell you that after, long after I realized that yes, most people that I knew of, they were dissatisfied because if you can't put food on the table for your loved ones, if you can't heat up your home, if you can't find clothes or anything you actually need, your basic needs, how could you not be unhappy?
Mm-hmm. And I got to ask too, what was your parents' entire role in this situation? Obviously, you were younger, and then when you got a little bit older, you moved to Canada and whatnot. But your parents must have been stressed. They were starting this entire new life for you and your brother. Like you mentioned, you moved away from all your friends and family members. Like that is very stressful, and it's a very bold thing to do as parents to be able to say, "All right, we're going to leave here so we can create a better life for our sons elsewhere." Hopefully is always the key word. And obviously it worked out, but looking back, like what have your parents told you about that entire situation?
Yeah, it's been very difficult. To be honest, when I moved, it was all about me, because I had to leave so much behind, and I was like, I didn't think about anyone else, and it was very selfish of me at the time, but I was a teenager. And then I started to realize, well, wait a second, my parents had to leave so much more behind, and they were in their early 40s when we moved to Canada, right? And they had to leave so much behind. They had to make some really tough choices, like sell everything they had. And we came over with very little money because it wasn't translating the same as, you sell everything you have. You think you had a lot, but you had very little and move to a brand new country. And I'm sure this is the same story with many people in your audience. Otherwise, they have had to immigrate to another country, or by choice or otherwise, to find or to chase a better future, or to have a chance at a better future. Perhaps those are the better words. So it was very, very difficult for them. And it took me years until I started to flip it around. It's not just about me. I have to look at how they led life. So we've had some conversation, but keep in mind, my parents, like many other people their age, they're from a generation where the communist regime is all they knew. And it was all about keeping to yourself, not showing emotion, being strong for your family, being strong for your loved ones. So this type of communication is going deep into those feelings. It's not very common for people of the generation and from that background. So even me trying to go into deep conversations with them around that, it's not necessarily something that they want to talk about. But again, like most of us can feel energies, we can tell when someone is not happy, when someone is perhaps going through something. And I could sense that throughout our time at the beginning in Canada, because it was a huge adjustment for everyone involved.
And what was your first feelings and kind of excitements when you first moved to Canada? And before you answer that too, I want to highlight how amazing your parents were. They were trying to create a better life for you and your brother. They up and leave their entire what they've known for their entire lives. They just leave so they could try and chase something a little bit better for you and your brother. And I just can't even imagine the kind of feelings. They were in their 40s. They have spent their entire lives in one country. And here they are to just go forward and chase something new. What was it like for you in that instance to watch them do something like that when you were younger? And then what was the new feeling once you got to Canada? Were you all excited? Were you still angry that you had to leave? What was going through your head?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned, I was more selfish back then as a teenager, right? Going through my through what teenagers go through at the time. And I thought it was unfair that I had no choice in the matter, right? I had no say in it, that I had to leave all of that behind, of course, not realizing that everyone had to leave that behind for a chance at a better future, right? It was all about me in that first, I want to say 6 months. And it was a tough adjustment. And I like you said, right? I mean, I'm so grateful for my parents and everything that they've done. And of course, in hindsight now, I see all the sacrifices they made and still are making for my brother and I, and how much that helped us to be where we are today in life. But if I'm honest, I was selfish. I was about me. It took a bit of time, like I said, about 6 months to realize that, wait a second, this is actually a lot better than anything I've had back at home, right? In terms of like the type of food we had access to, the type of relationships, the type of opportunities, where before in Romania, I couldn't necessarily see the opportunities that could come up later in life. In Canada, they became a lot more clear after the first 6 or so months. And we moved in September of 2000, right before the winter would start. And that's something that we never had to experience in Romania. I mean, we had winters, but not anywhere near the level of Canada, right? So there was the fact that friends were gone or virtual. That was the start of the internet, so it's very hard to communicate with them. The winter, new people, new culture, all of that. But you know what was beautiful there, Brendan? The fact that where we moved, my parents knew some people, so they were like distant friends. And then the apartment building that we moved into was made up of people from Romania, made up of people from Croatia, Serbia, other Eastern European blocs. And you found some similarity. And what really blew my mind as a young adult at the time, and then more on, is the diversity in Canada. And it's very similar in the States as well in many parts. And that diversity allowed me to see how beautiful every culture is, but at the same time, how even though people appear different on the outside, or maybe where they're coming from, we're actually all very, very similar inside. We all want joy. We all want fulfillment in some way or another. We all want success in life, not just for ourselves, for everyone around us.
And going back to how you mentioned when you first moved there, you were all focused on me. To quote the great man who just passed away, Toby Keith, he says, "I want to talk about me. I want to talk about I." Right? He has an entire song just speaking on how he wants to express his own feelings, and everyone focus on him for a minute. And so looking at your life at the time, you were living in that exact same situation. You were trying to put the entire situation on saying, oh my gosh, parents, why would you ever do this to me? I had my high school
That's
sweetheart. I had all my friends. I had everything in life that I wanted. It was on the up right then. But now looking back on that situation for yourself, it's obviously changed perspective a little bit. And so what has that taught you about accountability inside of your own life, on how you've been able to hold yourself accountable now, trying not to always focus on what you care and what you want and what your so-called needs are, but also focusing on the needs of everyone around you?
Oh, I love the question, Brandon, so much. And I would say, first of all, what I've come to realize later in life is that the importance of balance. So after that experience, when it was all about me, honestly, for the next decade or so, it became more about everyone else than myself, which meant I started to ignore some of my own needs, some of my own wants, and all that. And that was kind of something that happened even growing up to some degree. There was always like this yin and yang. Sometimes I would care more about others, sometimes more about me. And what I've come to realize is that the balance is very important, meaning that, yes, I can care about myself and not be selfish, and at the same time care about others as well. Because when you get to ignore one side of the equation, that's usually when pain starts to surface up in your life. Right? If it's just about yourself, maybe narcissistic people, let's say it's always about them, then you're going to suffer where? In everything, relationships, everything else you have in life. But if you're all about other people, you're going to suffer because you never give yourself time to be with yourself, to be with your emotions, your feelings, to care for yourself. And, people talk about self-love a lot. And I thought that was crazy, and it's something that New Age people do, until I realized that self-love really, it means to take care of your own needs as well. To, like your podcast says, get over yourself. Nobody's going to come save you. Take care of your own needs, and that will allow you to take care of other people's needs as well. But that's what the balance has to be struck.
And so now you obviously teach this same message to many individuals who work with you one-on-one. So tell us a little bit about your entire process of helping people hold themselves more accountable, and a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question, Brandon. And let me tell you this. What I've come to realize in this life is that we don't always get to do what we want. And that's true, right? For example, I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my parents. And they were like, you got to go take engineering. They're both engineers. That's going to give you the best chance at the best life, right? And that's what I did. I started with going for engineering. And then a couple of years in, I realized I didn't like it much. And I made a change to mathematics, which was close enough so I didn't lose all the credits. But my passion has always been psychology. And what I've realized over the years, and this is now being proven more and more with what's called neuroplasticity, or the idea that your brain has the potential to change, not just your thoughts, but your limiting beliefs as well, is the idea that the one place we have 100% control over is our thoughts and beliefs. And if we don't take care of those, then our emotions and feelings will be impacted, then our actions will be impacted by that, then what we have will be impacted, so the outcomes, and of course our environment will be impacted. So, to answer your question in a long way, it all starts for me with what I call the psychology. Our thoughts and beliefs about ourselves, about those around us, and about the world at large. So if I have a thought or a belief about myself that I'm not good enough, how is that going to relate to an emotion and a feeling, and then to an action, and then to an outcome? It's likely not going to be great, right? Like, you wouldn't be the man you are today if you had feelings that you're not good enough, that you're always a procrastinator, that you're always filling the blanks, things that people tell themselves all the time, including me at one point in my life, right? I have been someone that would say I'm too fat, or I'm too ugly, or I'm too much of a procrastinator. I'm not good enough for certain things, and that will limit you from what you can achieve. So in what I talk and in my coachings and mentorship programs, be it one-on-one or groups, that's the first step. If you cannot get the foundation right, it's like building a house on top of an old foundation. Yeah, it may stand up for a bit, but then a bit of wind comes in, a storm comes in, and then your house falls apart. And that's why most of us struggle to take on the mindset of, let's say, someone that's amazing, or read a book and implement what's in the book for more than maybe a month or two, because our foundations are not strong enough. And that's what I failed in the past, in my physical game, in my emotional game, in all of them. And right now I'm in the process of like, okay, I've taken care of this. Now it's about taking care of this and finding that balance.
So walk me through. Say I am I'm going to give you a scenario here, and I want you to walk me through. I'm going to
Perfect.
give you a scenario of some of the kind of demographic of who listens to my podcast here. I'm a young adult, I'm a young man, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I'm trying to figure out the kind of person I want to be, the career I want to chase, some of the dreams I have. I have a little bit of desire to get something rolling, but I'm not sure where to start. What's kind of the first step you would tell me to kind of get my brain in the right direction?
I love that. So on my show, we talked about the power of choice and realizing that you always have a choice. Now, likely, if you're a young man and you're not sure about any of these directions yet, that means that you likely have been living a life where you looked externally for answers. So maybe your parents had an idea about what you should be doing to be successful. Then your teachers had a different idea. Then your friends perhaps had a different idea as well. And now you're in a spot where like, well, I have all these options, but then I look at the news and I see that even though people are climbing the corporate ladder, they're not happy. They're not making the money they want. What gives? So now we get into the struggle. And my biggest message is for those that can watch this, not just listen. I have a sign right behind here that says follow your heart. And that's what I would start with someone that's saying, you know what, I don't know what I want to do. To me, it's like, let's follow our heart. And that doesn't mean anything, right? It can mean like, oh, fancy new age stuff. But no, what it really means to me is that when I say follow your heart, is leave everything external out and go inwards. And there are exercises that we would work through together, and I can give some examples, where we would look and find out who you are at your core. Because here's what I believe. Every single person on this earth was put here for a reason, and we each have a different purpose. Now, usually your purpose in this life, again, everyone can have a different one, but it has to do with being in service to yourself and others in some form, shape, or way. I've helped hundreds of people uncover their why, their purpose, their mission in life, and I haven't seen one that's not tailored to service to themselves and service to others. Not one, not even close. So it's about finding what's really pushing you through that. But when one other step that's very, very important is understanding what your gifts are. Because as I said, everyone is put here for a reason and a purpose. And I'm a strong believer that we all have our unique gifts and talents and strengths that we come into this life with. And most of us are not aware about this. I work with people in their 40s, in their 50s. I work with people in their 20s. And at all age brackets, I'm seeing the same thing. People have a vague idea, oh, I'm a good musician, or I'm someone that's always on time, and I value that. They have an idea of their gifts, but they don't really know how to articulate them. And more importantly, they don't really know how to say, okay, so if these are my gifts, what's my overarching why? And then how much does it show in my life? Because I can guarantee you that most people, they do not leverage their gifts enough in their life. And here's another part of that. So you have your gifts, you have your strengths, right? Ideally, you want to use more of them, because using more of them means you're going to get to abundance quicker. And when I say abundance, I'm not talking money. I'm talking abundance in joy, happiness, relationships, financially as well, but also emotionally, spiritually, connection to everyone and everything. So once you find that you can do more of it, but also there's the other side of the equation, which we know that you and I talked about this at length on my show, there are challenges that get put in your life. There's always going to be challenges that come up. Someone that's close to you may pass away. Someone you're in a relationship with may go away. You may start a business and it fails. You may have a business with a partner and they screw you over, right? Like any of those things will happen in your life. Now, yours might be different than mine. And the second part of that is, so I said, we have the gifts, we also have the challenges and the weaknesses, right? Maybe a limiting belief is our weakness. Maybe talking badly to ourselves is a weakness. It's identifying those weaknesses and then getting tools to work through them. So essentially, if you look at a graph, I want to increase my ability to use the gifts and decrease how many weaknesses show up in my life and derail me from using my gifts in this life. So a young person listening to this, if you start first with who you are, truly understanding who you are, then it allows you to then understand your gifts, understand your weaknesses, and then work to move them in the right direction.
Perfect, Constantine. And as we're kind of coming up to the close of today's episode on the Get Over Yourself podcast, I got to ask, you've given a very, very detailed framework on kind of the process somebody should take when they're trying to figure out their own journey. And obviously that's very individual and unique towards every person. But you've talked a lot about finding those gifts as well. Everyone's born with certain talents and gifts and these opportunities and whatnot. What happens if you're somebody who feels like they don't have any talents, they don't have any of those gifts? What's their step to do?
Those are my favorite type of people to work with. Because honestly, within half an hour, we can find at least one or two gifts, and they'll go back in their chair and be like, I didn't realize that. Now, of course, you have to get to a point where you want to be sitting across someone or going to watch a video that will help you find those gifts. What I would challenge a person like that to think through and ask themselves is, look at everything that happened up to this point in your life. Think about any of your big memories and look back at them. And not look at how you necessarily felt about it, because that's important, but look at how others felt in those instances. Maybe when you're 9 years old, you went to your grandparents' home, you did something amazing, and your grandparents were super excited and they praised you on something. Maybe you were 12 years old and you had this big event at school where you got bullied, but instead of fighting back and beating people up, you decided to turn the other cheek, so to speak, and come from a place of compassion. Those are the stories that will show you what your true gifts are below the surface. Because you see, all those gifts that we have in our life, they will show up in your day-to-day activities, but you won't know them. You won't see them, but they will show up. And that's how I work with the people I work with. When we get to that point, I ask them, hey, bring 10 stories to me. You don't need to know the details, just 10 stories that are big from your life, from the day you were born that you remember to today. And then we dive into those stories, because it's not about the story. It's about what's below the surface, like how you felt, how you made others feel. And that's not easy to get to. It could take you 20 minutes to go through a story and get to the bottom of it. And that's why it's so important for people listening to this. If you're someone that doesn't believe you have gifts and talents, go to your friends. Ask them, hey, why are you a friend of mine? Why? And then listen. And you'll see, well, I'm your friend, Brendan, because you're always someone that listens to me. I'm your friend because you're always there for me. I mean, if that's not a gift to be there for someone, then what is? So that's how
I gotta say, I think the two most impactful things you said were creating that solid foundation, making sure you have that base layer that everyone can kind of grow up on, because if you don't have the solid foundation, you can't go anywhere from there. And then what you just mentioned, that everybody has gifts. I cannot agree more. Everybody, and once again, this is coming maybe from my Christian background, but everybody is put onto this earth with a certain purpose. We may not know it yet. We may be trying to discover it. We may be trying to discover how to do our purpose, but we all have one. So if we could just sit back and take the time to actually think about, okay, why was I put here on this earth? What can I do to achieve whatever I was put here to do? And why am I doing it to begin with? It's just a beautiful thing, and I promise everybody has one. You just got to actually put in the time to figure out what it is. And Constantine, I got to praise you for being able to be one of those people where somebody can rely on and think, all right, now I know a little bit more of the direction I need to take. But I got to close out with this, Constantine. We obviously just finished recording on your show as well. Yes. We had a great conversation over there. So for all of my audience who enjoyed today's conversation and enjoyed what Constantine had to share, make sure to go check out his show. And Constantine, you can kind of give that a plug here in a second. But make sure to go check that out, guys. We can finish the entire conversation over there. Super fun. And Constantine, where can people find you? And thanks for joining us, man.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Brendan, for the platform you created and for giving me the opportunity to sit here and have a conversation with you and for you to be on my show. Now, where people can find me, so the show that Brendan was referencing is called Unleash Thyself. So it's about unleashing that best version of ourselves, removing all that indoctrination, all of the old beliefs that don't really sit well with us. And that's what you're going to find on the show. And that's why Brendan was on the show, because he talks about self-limitations, getting over them, getting over yourself, getting over limiting beliefs. And yeah, you want to check that out. That's Unleash Thyself, unleashthyself.com. You can find us on social media, on YouTube at Unleash Thyself. And personally, if you want to reach out to me, either email Constantin at unleashthyself.com or LinkedIn is the best way as well. Constantin Morun. You'll find me there. I have a unique name, so you'll be able to find me. Again, Brendan, such a pleasure to chat with you.
For everyone who listened to today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, I appreciate it. If you know of anyone who would be impacted by hearing today's conversation, whether they would be impacted both personally in their personal life or in their spiritual life, make sure to go ahead and send it on over. You guys are my best form of marketing. But guys, at the end of the day, just remember it'll all be okay. Just take a step back and continue to push yourselves over the limits so you can achieve the dreams that you want to achieve.